used to love sitting on my front porch, gazing at the mountain full of trees spread out before me. Each season gave me a new appreciation for the beauty of nature. Even winter, which I hate, would color my trees in the most pristine white, making them look like a crowd of bridesmaids dressed in their spotless gowns, waiting for their bride. My favorite season was fall. The explosions of colors laid out like a gigantic quilt that changed from one day to the next, until the last leaf floated to the ground and surrendered to winter. I could sit there for hours watching. Time would slip away as I admired my trees in total contentment. That was before. I haven't looked at my trees in a long time ever since. It was a beautiful spring day. The blossoms on the trees were full of color right before the leaves unfurled their brilliant spring green. There was a stillness in the air. Usually, the wind blows non-stop down the mountain to varying degrees of strength, but it's always there. On this day, there wasn't even a puff of breeze. It felt good since the temperatures were only in the lower 70s, but something about it seemed off. My trees stood silent, unmoving, as if they had also noticed the stillness and were awaiting some unseen harbinger of ill tidings. As usual, I took solace from such thoughts by admiring my trees. As I panned through the colorful buds about to emerge, I saw something I didn't expect. One of the trees moved. It wasn't much of a movement, just a subtle twitch of a branch. I shrugged it off as a rogue breeze, but it was only in that one spot. None of the trees around it had moved. This drew my attention, and I focused on the offending spot. It was around 50 yards away, just into the tree line near a field. I picked up my binoculars, which are my constant companion when I sit on my porch to spot various birds and other oddities. I focused on this oddity to see if it was merely my imagination. Zooming in on the offending branch, it seemed to be nothing out of order at first. But as I gave it my full attention, I noticed something odd. There were no buds on the branch. As strange as that was, the next observation I made was the branch was straight as an arrow. Intriguing, but hardly conclusive. But there were several other small branches growing straight up out of it. None of these had any buds either. These facts swirled through my mind, creating half-baked conclusions, when without warning, the branch moved. I watched with rapt fascination as the branch moved straight up. It wasn't like a breeze had caught it and waved it around as branches want to do. It went straight up, staying completely level as it was before. This curiosity captured my total attention as everything around me ceased to exist until I solved the riddle of the moving branch. Fanciful thoughts of Ents sprang from the favorite stories of my youth and well into adulthood. I smiled at the foolishness of such machinations. I knew my mind was having a bit of fun with me. It was the only conclusion that made any sense. This entire foray had been my mind playing tricks on me. If only that were the case, I would tell this story with the mirth of an old man spreading flights of fancy. I was about to put down my binoculars and take my mind inside for a nap, where it could venture out into a proper dream when the branch did the impossible. It moved sideways. It was like I was watching a time lapse of the branch in its growing cycle. Only none of the smaller points on the branch grew. It only got longer. And then I saw it. At the end of the branch, there was a head. I'd seen lots of animals during my time sitting on my porch: bears, mountain lions, skunks, coyotes, but I'd never seen anything like this. It looked like the bare skull of a deer. There wasn't an ounce of skin on it. It was several sizes bigger than the largest deer skull I've ever seen. It peeked around the corner, and its hand grasped the tree. It was skeletal as well, but the worst part was, it was looking right at me with its empty eye sockets. There weren't any eyes I could see. My mind didn't give me a minute to ponder if this was a figment of my imagination. I was out of my chair, inside, and locking the door behind me before I knew I'd even gotten up. The last thing I remembered was how high up on the tree the head was. It must have been close to 8 feet tall. I ran through the house, locking all the doors and windows, wondering how much good it would do if that thing decided it wanted in. My closest neighbor was a mile away, and I began wondering if this wouldn't be a good time to visit. While I stood in the middle of my kitchen, panicked and indecisive about what to do next, I realized, to my horror, that I had left my binoculars on the porch. The thought that this nightmare of a monster would run up and steal my binoculars was totally ludicrous. But if I wanted to check through the window to see if it was still there, they would be quite invaluable. Convincing myself to retrieve them was another matter. I slowly approached the window that looked out onto the front porch, as if it were the monster, waiting to grab me and drag me to its lair. With great trepidation, and using more than my fair share of courage, I stepped to the window and peeked out through the curtain. My initial reaction was pure joy as I no longer saw the monster in the tree line. I began chuckling to myself for the prank my mind had played on me and making all sorts of excuses for what the apparition was. The smile fell from my face when I saw it standing in the middle of the field. Not only was it far beyond the horror my imagination had presented, but it was a good 20 yards closer to my house. The nightmare stood easily 8 feet tall and had a massive rack of horns that went straight out in either direction at least 3 feet. What I could see of it was skeletal. There was no skin at all, except for the cloak that was draped over its shoulders and fell to mid-calf. The cloak looked rough, like it had been made from the skins of other animals. Those unholy, empty eye sockets were staring straight at me. I froze as terror gripped me and squeezed every ounce of fluid out of my bladder. It took a step towards me, then another. I knew there was no way I'd make it across the driveway to my car before it caught me and tore me to pieces. My mind started throwing out anything and everything it could. Call someone was the most plausible. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Came the wonderful sound of rescue. I'm being stalked by something, I said. Something? Or do you mean someone? No, it's definitely something. Okay, describe this something for me. I gave the best description I could of the monster, not daring to look out the window for confirmation of my details. All right, the operator said. Well, give me your address, and I'll send over a cryptid hunter as soon as possible. Oh, okay. My address is... The line disconnected. Hello? I said desperately. I tried calling back, but it just kept ringing. Hiding didn't seem to be an option. It was obvious from the animal skins it wore that this thing was a good hunter. I assumed that meant it had a good sense of smell and would be able to sniff me out of any hiding place in my house. My next option was to leave. I went to the kitchen and grabbed my car keys, hoping to slip out unnoticed. Those hopes were dashed when I looked out and saw the monster walking up my driveway. I ducked behind the door, eyes darting all around looking for anywhere to hide. To this day, I don't know why, but I ran to the drawers and grabbed a butcher knife. What good it was going to do against a monster that was entirely bones was beyond me. But I wasn't exactly calmly thinking my options through at the moment. The first crash splintered my outside door. The second crash destroyed it. The monster ducked its head and stepped inside my mudroom, staring at me. I had 3 options: run to the living room, go upstairs, or down to the basement. I have no idea why I sprinted toward the basement door. I shut and locked it behind me as the inside door broke into pieces. Making my way down the steps as quickly and quietly as possible, I listened to the floorboards creak above me. Looking around the semi-finished basement, with just enough room to stand if I ducked my head. I quickly discovered that there were no clear-cut hiding places. The footsteps above slowly made their way back to the living room, then up the stairs. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought about going back up to the kitchen when the basement door flung open. The steps groaned under the weight of the monster, and I was overwhelmed by the stench of death. I ran back the short hallway toward the outside cellar door, but I knew it was too heavy for me to open from the inside. Standing there, helpless, like a deer in headlights, the oil furnace kicked on. It had been a nice day, but the furnace still kicked on from time to time to keep the temperature where it was set at. It didn't run for more than a minute before turning off. The oil tank sat beside the furnace, with both of them set a short space away from the wall. I dashed over behind the furnace and tried to stuff myself between it and the wall, making myself as small as possible in hopes that it might not see me. It wasn't long before I heard the scrape of bone on the concrete floor, getting closer. My life expectancy had shrunk to a matter of seconds. I wondered if anyone would ever know how I met my gruesome end. Or would my story be a mystery? An urban legend like so many others that live near forested areas and suddenly disappear, never to be seen or heard from again. The sniffing was my death knell. It drew closer as the horns appeared in front of me. My only advantage was the horns couldn't fit between the oil tank and the furnace. I celebrated a small victory that this hellish monster would at least have to put forth some effort in order to get me. It struggled to reach behind the furnace, almost reaching me. The only thing that stopped it was leaning against the furnace and drawing back as it cried out in pain from the heat. Realizing my hiding place was compromised, I darted behind the oil tank. Hoping the bulk of the tank would hinder it, I scooched as far as I could into the corner. There was only a small clearance between the tank and the wall, maybe a foot. I knew it couldn't get in here, but that didn't mean it couldn't reach me. Its arms were incredibly long. I watched as it seemed to be confused as to where I'd gone. The sniffing started again as it tried to locate me. But it seemed to be having problems. The fill pipe for the oil tank had a small leak. I'd wrapped rags around it, but there was still some oil in the rags. It seemed like the smell was throwing it off. For one brief moment, I saw it take a few steps away from me and my hiding place. It seemed like, by some miracle, I might be saved. It turned back toward the steps and seemed like it was leaving. I breathed a sigh of relief. Just then, it stopped, turned, and came straight toward the oil tank. It slammed its bulk against the tank, making the metal groan from the stress. It backed up and slammed into it again. This time, I could see the metal bracket that was bolted into the cement to keep the tank in place start to bend. I didn't think such a thing was possible, but after the third slam, the bolt broke. The tank teetered precariously toward the furnace. One more slam, and the front bracket broke. The tank listed on its side, falling in slow motion toward the furnace. As the tank fell, the intake pipe broke loose. There was now an opening at the top of the tank that was slowly falling toward the furnace. Halfway down, heating oil began splashing out of the opening. The monster didn't seem to care. It had caught sight of me and was pushing the tank down to get to me. I had to stand, or the tank would have crushed my leg. As soon as I did, it let out the most ungodly roar. If I hadn't soiled myself earlier, I would have then. I was stuck. It was checkmate. I was trapped in a corner with an oil tank and furnace blocking my way on one side and a murderous, unholy abomination on the other. As the tank came to rest against the furnace, it ripped off the side, exposing part of the firebox. Somehow, I discovered another horrible way to die. The oil was dripping down the side of the furnace and into the firebox. The intermittent nature of the oil furnace had kept me safe for the moment, as it wasn't currently running. But it was only a matter of time. The oil dripping out of the tank was making an ever-expanding puddle on the floor. I tiptoed further into the corner to stay away from it, but the monster was climbing over the tank and was almost able to reach me. It didn't matter what I did, I was about to die. Its skeletal fingers brushed my shoulder, trying to get a grip. In sheer panic and desperation, I did the strangest thing I think I've ever done. I took the knife that I'd carried with me from the kitchen, shoved it through the arm bones of the monster, and then straight up with every ounce of strength into the ceiling. To my great joy, the knife buried itself in the space between the wooden boards and stuck. The monster squealed and pulled back on the offending appendage, causing more damage, but not breaking free. In my moment of triumph, the most unexpected and wonderful thing happened. The oil furnace kicked on. I watched in fascination as the oil that the monster was standing in ignited. The flames quickly engulfed it as it squealed in pain. I scrambled over the downed tank as the fire came towards me. Just before I hit the concrete floor, the monster reached out to grab me. My side was instantly on fire, and for the briefest of moments, I thought it had me. But instead, it tore a gash in my side. I didn't bother to look down at the damage, just ran up the stairs and out the door, not stopping until I was in the car and speeding down the road. When I finally got my breathing under control, I pondered where I was going, aside from away from certain death. I reached down and touched my side, pulling away with a hand covered in blood. It seemed like my destination was set for me. The hospital it was. Being 20 minutes away from the nearest town, I wondered if the monster had killed me anyway. Bleeding to death would be better than being eaten, but I'd still be just as dead. Around 10 minutes into my trip, I saw flashing lights heading towards me and heard the siren of the fire truck as it sped past, heading up the hill. I assumed they were going to extinguish my house and hoped that the monster was already dead. The thought of it killing unsuspecting firemen almost made me turn around to go warn them. But I knew I'd never catch up with them, and if I tried, it would possibly be the last thing I ever did. The thought of losing all the things I'd collected over the course of my life saddened me. But being alive to feel the sadness was its own reward. The worst part of knowing that I would never go near that house again was I'd miss my trees. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to Descent into the Unknown for more horror content. If you have any real cryptid encounters, or you're a horror writer wanting to share your stories, please feel free to email me in the description anytime.